Fred Murphy glanced at his cell phone to see who was calling. He usually didn't take personal calls while working, but when he saw his daughter's number, he decided to answer. It was after 3 and Maria would be out of school, possibly with a problem. "Hello, Pumpkin. What can I do for my little girl today?" Fred asked with a smile. Maria knew he would do almost anything for her, and he had never tried to convince her otherwise, though he sometimes wondered if he should. "Daddy, there's a fire at the preschool. Darren Jr. and some other kids are trapped inside and can't get out," Maria cried. "Are you there right now, Maria?" Fred asked urgently, forgetting all the teasing he had planned. "Yes, but they won't let anyone get close. There are flames coming out of the roof." "I'll be right there, sweetheart." "Have you called your mom and Darren?" Fred asked. "Not yet, Dad," Maria cried. "Call them now and tell them what's happening. Don't try to enter that building, Maria. I'll be there in a couple of minutes," he promised. "Okay, Daddy, but hurry." Maria whimpered just before the connection ended. Fred didn't even bother to pick up his tools. He barely locked the front door as he sprinted to his truck. As he sped down the highway, he thought about the situation. Darren Jr.'s preschool was on the 3rd floor of a former elementary school in town. Fred had attended that same school, which used to house kindergarten through 8th grade. The school district built a new facility almost 20 years ago, and a developer turned the old building into small professional offices on the first 2 floors, with a preschool on the upper level. Fred remembered the heavy, opaque glass windows reinforced with wire mesh. He recalled an 8th grader trying to throw a folding chair through one of those windows. The chair bounced back, breaking the boy's leg, while the window remained unscathed. The lower half of each window was fixed and couldn't be opened. When Fred was in 8th grade, he often had the task of using a long pole with a small knob on a hook to lower the upper window sash about 2 feet. That was the building's only form of air conditioning. The open part of the window was still over 6 feet off the floor, preventing any chance of a child falling out or being thrown out when the window was open. As far as Fred remembered, those same windows were still in use today. None of the staff likely had the strength or means to break a window to escape. If people were indeed trapped, as Maria suggested, it meant the stairway and emergency exits were somehow unsafe or inaccessible. The building, over 100 years old and made of wood, would be uncontrollable in a fire, even with a sprinkler system, Fred knew. As he raced to the scene, Fred wondered why his daughter called him instead of the boy's father. Darren Jr. was her brother, but not Fred's son. The toddler's conception had triggered Fred's divorce from Maria's mother, Emma. Fred had a vasectomy shortly after Maria's birth, so when Emma turned up pregnant, she didn't even try to convince Fred the baby was his. She packed up and moved in with Darren Sanders, her boss and the owner of the car dealership where she worked, taking 12-year-old Maria with her. Fred had been devastated. He never suspected he was being cheated on until Emma confronted him with her pregnancy and announced she was leaving for Sanders. Blindsided, Fred fell into a deep depression, drank too much, and nearly lost his business. His shame was palpable. Though people seldom mentioned his broken marriage, he knew his small hometown buzzed with gossip. Sanders had cuckolded Fred, then effortlessly taken his wife and daughter away. Fred had even entered therapy, but it did little to relieve the pain and shame he felt. He knew he was headed for disaster and had no illusions about that. Then he met Polly, who moved into town a year after Fred's divorce. A widow with 2 teenage daughters, Polly bought a local diner and transformed it into a thriving restaurant. Fred sold and installed the new appliances for her business, and they got along well. Eventually, he worked up the nerve to ask her out, and they were married a year later. Polly was incredible, smart, attractive, and totally devoted to Fred. It would have been perfect if not for the frequent presence of Emma and Darren. Fred loved his daughter, Maria, and refused to let his feelings of shame, embarrassment, and anger toward Emma and Darren prevent him from having a close relationship with her. This meant Maria often stopped by Fred's house, which was conveniently located just half a mile from her high school. The complication for Fred was that Darren Jr.'s preschool was just a few blocks past Fred's house, so Maria often arrived with her little brother in tow. Fred struggled mightily to treat the boy well, but it wasn't easy. Polly understood how difficult the situation was for him, as it felt like Darren Sanders was rubbing Fred's failures in his face every time he saw the boy. What really frightened Fred was the hatred he felt for Maria's little brother, Darren Jr. He knew it wasn't the boy's fault that Emma had slept with Darren and conceived him. Yet, the child symbolized Fred's cuckoldry and his failure to keep his wife and family intact. Despite these feelings, Fred always made an effort not to be cruel to the boy, even though he felt he saw him far too often. Maria had turned to him in a dire situation, hoping her dad could somehow save her brother. Fred felt the weight of irony as he pressed the accelerator to the floor. Did he even want the boy to survive? Maybe Emma and Darren deserved a taste of the torment Fred had endured, but even as that thought flitted through his mind, he dismissed it. The boy was Maria's brother, and for his daughter, Fred would walk through fire. As he barreled through an intersection, Fred noticed a phone company bucket truck coming his way. He slammed on the brakes and threw his pickup into reverse as soon as he stopped. He quickly backed up to find a route down the side road. "What's the rush, Fred?" grinned Josh Perry, who was behind the wheel of the truck. "You're driving like a madman." "There's a fire at Growing Pains Preschool, Josh," Fred shouted, not wasting a second. "People are trapped. With your truck, we might be able to rescue some kids. Will you help me?" "Dan right," agreed Josh without hesitation. "Lead the way and tell me where to park." Fred already had his pickup in reverse, backing through the intersection before Josh could finish his sentence. He watched in his rearview mirror as Josh's truck skimmed the corner, almost tipping, and swung onto the main highway. Less than a minute later, Fred skidded to a stop across the street from the burning building, with Josh close behind. Fred was horrified to see that the entire east wall had collapsed. It had supported the external fire escape. Flames were already licking through the roof on the west end. If anyone remained alive on the third floor, they would be in the middle of the building. Fred signaled Josh to get as close to the inferno as safely possible. As he directed Josh, Mike Roberts, a member of the volunteer fire department and a fire police officer, ran up to him. "This is terrible, Fred. At least 3 kids and a teacher are still missing. The first 2 floors have been evacuated. The fire trucks are tied up at that blaze on Highway 56. They're still over 5 minutes away. The flames and smoke have cut off the stairway, and I'm at a loss for what to do. Mike, keep the bystanders back and the road clear for the fire trucks. Josh and I are going to try to get up to the windows and get the people out. Be ready to help once we get them down," Fred commanded with authority. He knew Mike was reliable but paralyzed by the weight of the situation and the fear of what could happen. Mike simply needed clear instructions, and he'd follow them to the letter. Fred spotted Maria running towards him and quickly signaled her to stay put with a forceful gesture. She stopped abruptly and tried to muster a reassuring smile at her father. Fred acknowledged her before turning to Josh. "Do you have a heavy hammer, Josh?" Fred asked. "We'll need it to break the window and see if anyone's inside." Josh rummaged through a compartment, producing an 8-pound sledgehammer, and headed toward the bucket, with Fred following closely. "Fred, I'm telling you, we won't reach that window. With that retaining wall in the way, we'll be about 5 feet short," Josh warned grimly as he climbed into the bucket, with Fred following suit. "Get us as close as you can," Fred insisted. "We'll figure it out." The heat from the building was intense as they began their ascent. Smoke curled around the closed windows, indicating the upper floor was scorching hot. By now, a crowd had gathered, their mood shifting from somber to outright terror as word spread that 3 children and a teacher were trapped on the 3rd floor. An elderly man near Maria speculated that there had been a gas leak followed by an explosion, pointing out that a wall had been blown off and that the inferno ensued immediately. A woman nearby added that she lived up the road and had some windows shattered by the blast. She lamented that they should have stuck to using the coal furnace, as it never blew up. Meanwhile, Fred and Josh maneuvered the bucket as close to the window as possible. Josh's estimate of falling short by 5 feet was accurate. "Hand me the sledgehammer and hold onto my belt, Josh. I need both arms to swing it." Fred ordered as he positioned himself precariously on the edge of the bucket. "Damn it," growled Josh, grabbing the back of Fred's belt with one hand and clinging to the bucket's railing with the other. Nothing on earth could make him let go of his friend, whose life was in his hands. "Oh my God," a woman in the crowd next to Maria exclaimed. "Those men are risking their lives. Look how high up they are, and that one is practically hanging on by nothing but his friend's grip." Maria's heart pounded as she heard her mother scream. Her mother had parked near the gathering crowd and now seemed ready to rush toward the building. "Mom, you can't go in there. Several men have already tried the stairs. Dad is trying to get in through that window. You need to stay here. Dad will get Darren out, trust me. You know how strong Dad is." Emma wiped her eyes and followed her daughter's gaze to the two men perched precariously in the bucket. She gave an involuntary gasp. Fred hefted the sledgehammer, assessing the situation. Time was running out, or perhaps it already had. He knew the window would be tough to break, and it was better to swing too hard than too softly. With that thought, he swung the heavy hammer with every ounce of strength. Josh gritted his teeth, exerting all his effort to keep Fred in place as the momentum threatened to pull him forward. The hammer shattered the window, but Fred lost his grip on the handle, which disappeared inside. "Damn it," Fred cursed, feeling a sinking sensation in his stomach. The hole was about the size of a volleyball and too high to reach. The wire mesh was doing its job. They stared at the window for a few seconds when a tremendous roar echoed, and the entire window, sash and all, blew out from the building. The force struck Fred on the shoulder, knocking him backward. The crowd, including Maria and Emma, fell into a stunned silence. They watched in horror as Fred toppled over the edge of the bucket. At that moment, a massive fireball blasted through the air where Fred's head had been just seconds before. In the same breathless silence, they saw Josh summon incredible strength and pull Fred back into the basket. As soon as it was clear that Fred was unharmed, the crowd erupted in cheers and shouts of encouragement. Fred clapped Josh on the shoulder and quickly climbed back onto the edge of the bucket, with Josh gripping his belt again. The flames had momentarily retreated, and with a final push from Josh on his shoe soles, Fred pulled himself through the window into the burning building. Once inside, Fred crouched low beneath the thick smoke and rushed across the floor, shouting as he moved. The heat was searing, and the smoke suffocatingly dense. Dropping to his knees to stay beneath the worst of it, he called out again. "Over here." A woman's voice responded. "Help me with the children." Fred spotted some shapes near a large desk and crawled towards them as fast as he could. A middle-aged woman was huddled against the desk, clutching 3 toddlers to her chest. Quickly assessing the situation, Fred urged her to pass him 2 of the kids and start crawling to the window with the remaining child. The open window was feeding the flames, which were rapidly spreading through the room. The woman moved with surprising agility, and Fred found himself struggling to keep up while carrying 2 crying toddlers with one arm and using his free hand to maintain balance. Fred realized the window was too far from Josh and the safety bucket for a direct handoff. Once they reached the window, he swiftly explained his plan to the woman. Admiring her strength and courage, he gently lifted her and helped her onto the windowsill. She positioned herself, and Fred wrapped one hand around her waist. With his free arm, he grabbed a little girl by her shirt and handed her to the woman on the sill. Steadying the woman with both hands, he helped her lean out as far as she could before she released the child. Maria and Emma watched, riveted by the drama unfolding before them. They stood together, their eyes fixed on Fred as he crawled through the window and into the burning building. It felt like an eternity, with smoke billowing out of the gaping hole where the window had once been. Suddenly, the crowd witnessed a woman appearing from the smoke, seemingly floating out and landing precariously on the windowsill. The abruptness and unexpectedness of it left the growing crowd in stunned silence for several seconds. "That's Monica Anderson," an onlooker exclaimed. "She works at the preschool." As she was identified, Monica Anderson reached back, and a small girl appeared in her hands. The crowd fell silent once more as Monica swung the child away from her body and let go. The little girl fell. Josh Perry, growing anxious while waiting for Fred to return, was struggling with the intensifying heat and the escalating roar of the fire. Just then, he saw the woman perched on the windowsill, too high and far for him to reach. He watched in alarm as she swung a little girl out and dropped her. Instinctively, Josh stretched his arms and caught the child. It was surprisingly easier than he had imagined. Hardly having placed the child in the bucket, another little girl was dropped to him. Once again, Josh caught her and gently set her down alongside the first child. Fred had just handed Monica the two little girls when he noticed the absence of the little boy, Darren Jr. Darren wandered off. Fred shouted above the roar of the flames. "I have to let go of you to find him. Hang on." Monica nodded in understanding, and Fred released his grip on her, crawling through the thickening smoke to find Darren. He soon spotted the boy and made his way over, grabbing him and heading back towards the window. Maria and Emma anxiously watched Monica drop the two little girls to Josh Perry. They nervously awaited Darren's safe delivery. 30 tense seconds passed with no sign of him. The tension was palpable. Suddenly, a massive roar erupted, and Monica Anderson was blown off the sill. The crowd gasped in unison as Josh Perry miraculously caught her by her light jacket. She dangled in the smoke-filled air for what felt like an eternity before Josh managed to pull her safely into the bucket. Flames erupted through the window, blowing out several other panes. The roof began to quake as fire burst through it in multiple spots. Josh swiftly grabbed the controls, lowering the bucket as fast as possible. The building next to his truck shuddered, and the roar of the blaze intensified. As the first two fire trucks arrived in front of the building, Josh was already handing the kids to the bystanders. He then hoisted Monica Anderson and rapidly carried her away from the bucket and the truck. The side of the building started to collapse as Josh and the Good Samaritans rushed to flee the inferno. By the time Josh reached the gathering crowd, his bucket truck was crushed by burning debris, feeding the fire even further. Maria and Emma stood in mute shock, their eyes glued to the window. They half expected Fred to appear with Darren. But as the building began to implode, it became clear no one else would emerge from that window. "Dad!" screamed Maria. "Darren!" "Where's Fred?" a voice demanded from behind Emma. "Oh, Polly!" Maria exclaimed, turning to throw herself into the woman's arms, sobbing. "Dad's in that building. He saved two little girls and Mrs. Anderson, but Darren Jr. and Dad never made it out." Maria felt her stepmother tense up before taking a deep breath and beginning to question her. "Fred and Jr. are inside the building. He risked his life for those kids. We need to stay strong," Maria, Polly urged, despite her obvious distress. "Your father is an incredible man. He won't quit. He'll never give up. We need to keep faith and help in any way we can." By this time, the ambulance had arrived, and the two girls and Monica Anderson were being treated before transport. An EMT was checking Josh Perry, advising him to go to the hospital for treatment, but Josh stubbornly refused. "I'm not leaving until Fred is out of there. We worked as a team, and there's no way I'm abandoning him now. Take care of the lady and the two little girls," he insisted firmly, "but I'm staying put." Polly fought back tears as the parents of the rescued girls thanked Fred and Josh for their heroism. Maria and Emma sobbed loudly, knowing families were reunited with their children, while Fred and Darren Jr. remained trapped in the blazing building. By this time, additional fire companies had arrived, making a valiant effort to control the flames. News vans rolled up shortly after, with reporters starting to question the bystanders. Polly, Maria, and Emma declined all requests for interviews. Suddenly, Darren Sanders appeared. Emma quickly briefed him on the dire situation and its potential consequences. "I heard it took forever for the fire trucks to get here," he roared. "Why do we even donate to these failures? They always have their hands out, but where are they when we really need them?" Two reporters, overhearing Sanders' tirade, rushed to him with microphones, their cameramen trailing. They captured about 2 minutes of Darren Sanders, lambasting the local fire department and threatening legal action against the volunteer group. Maria and Emma watched in horror, knowing most of the firefighters and their families personally. How could anyone doubt their dedication? Their anguish deepened. Then, Polly stepped in front of Darren. Mr. Sanders is very upset. His son is in that inferno, along with my husband. I want to make it clear that we deeply appreciate and are profoundly grateful to our local volunteer fire department. When my husband can speak, he'll say the same thing. These people are our friends and neighbors. They have done everything and more. They are heroes. Polly declared, tears streaming down her face before turning away. Out of the camera's view, Polly pulled out her cell phone, dialed quickly, and spoke softly. Jim, close the restaurant, make about 6 sandwiches, and a ton of coffee. Bring it to Ash Street, just past the high school. We have firefighters busting their butts, and they need nourishment. Yes, Jim, we're all praying for Fred and the boy. You saw me on TV? Good. Yeah, he's an idiot. Now hurry down here. This is going to be a long night. Time crawled as the firefighters slowly managed to bring the blaze under control, or more accurately, as the fire depleted its fuel. News reporters lingered, eager to capture any noteworthy details for the 11 o'clock broadcast. Polly made it a point to speak with the firemen whenever they returned to their trucks for a drink or a bite. She expressed her heartfelt gratitude to every member of the fire and ambulance corps, knowing that this is what Fred would have wanted. Polly was acutely aware of the guilt and inadequacy his brave souls might feel if the situation ended as grimly as it seemed. They neither needed nor deserved to be the targets of anger and blame from a grieving parent or spouse. Her late husband, a volunteer firefighter, had often spoken of his pride in his company and his fear of losing someone in a blaze. These men and women needed encouragement and praise, especially in times of tragedy. As the clock struck 11, the news channels led with the story of the fire, hinting that fatalities were possible. Hearing these reports pained Polly deeply. Emma was sobbing uncontrollably, while Darren Sanders vented his frustrations, blaming fire inspectors, firefighters, town officials, state authorities, and even the federal government. Maria clung to Polly for comfort and took the time to thank everyone for their hard work and dedication. Polly saw a lot of Fred's strength in Maria. He would be proud of his daughter. Suddenly, an ambulance activated its flashing lights and began moving toward the west side of the charred structure. The remaining onlookers and journalists quickly took notice. Then, Polly and Maria heard a man shouting from deep within the debris. "We found them," was all they could make out as they rushed in the direction the ambulance had taken. Fred had wrapped an arm around little Darren and was making his way toward the safety of a window when catastrophe struck. A section of the roof collapsed just as the floor beneath him gave way. Clutching the boy tightly to his chest, they plummeted downward. Though it felt like an eternity, Fred knew it was only a matter of seconds. They ricocheted off beams and burning boards until finally he crashed into something solid. The heat was unbearable. Fred knew he had to find shelter soon, or both he and the boy in his arms would perish. Glancing around, he realized he was in the basement of the old school. He had fond memories of this very basement, where he'd spent time with his mom's brother, the school janitor. After school, Fred often chatted with his uncle and even helped him with some of his chores. It was then that Fred remembered the coal furnace, recalling its massive firebox that once warmed the entire building. In warmer months, he had assisted his uncle with its maintenance. If the furnace was still there, it would be just around a brick abutment. With no other options, Fred decided to crawl towards the spot where the furnace had stood years ago. Only then did he realize his left leg was broken, his foot grotesquely twisted backward. Determined, Fred used his good leg and empty arm to drag himself and the boy around the brick wall. To his immense relief, the old coal furnace was still intact. Sweat poured down his face, a mix of intense heat and stabbing pain, but he managed to reach the furnace. He unlatched and swung open the door. Meanwhile, Maria and Polly were nervously approaching the parked ambulance when they heard a man shouting that Fred and Darren had been found. Polly wondered briefly why he didn't use his radio, but then came the louder cry. "They're alive." Tears streamed down Polly's cheeks as she hugged Maria tightly. Maria was sobbing loudly. The harsh glare of camera lights fell on them as they struggled towards the ruins of the old school. A firefighter intercepted them, urging them to wait, as the old foundation was still dangerously hot. Time seemed to drag on endlessly, but eventually they saw several firefighters carrying a backboard with Darren Jr. restrained but alert, his eyes open. Emma and Darren rushed past Polly, speaking softly to their son, reassuring him they had missed him and promising him ice cream soon. The boy was then carried into a waiting ambulance, with Emma climbing in beside him as its sirens blared to life. Polly watched as Sanders hurried back to his car, while a second ambulance reversed up to the charred remains of the school. It took another 10 minutes before Fred was carried out on a backboard. A paramedic had inserted an IV into his arm. Polly noticed his left foot twisted at an odd angle, cushioned with blankets. As they neared the ambulance, Josh Perry suddenly appeared beside Fred. "Fred, you're the man," he exclaimed with a grin. "I knew if anyone could make it out of that mess, it would be you. That was some incredible work, dude." "You saved my life, Josh. I won't ever forget that," croaked Fred. By this time, reporters were swarming around, shouting questions at him on live TV. The firemen formed a protective line on either side of the ambulance doors, keeping the reporters at bay as Fred was gently placed inside. Polly quickly climbed in after him, with no objections from anyone. A day and a half later, Fred was finally alert enough to speak. He lay in his hospital bed, watching the news. As the program went to commercial, Polly squeezed his hand and smiled. "Well, Fred, it looks like you found a way to pay back Sanders and Emma big time. You really got them good," asserted Polly. "How do you figure that, Polly? I'm here with a compound fracture while Junior is already up and about. How did I get them good, as you put it?" "He stole your wife, Fred, and it hurt you deeply. Emma's betrayal hurt even more. They took everything from you, your family, your faith in people, even your self-respect. You felt like you had lost your manhood. You told me this several times. Now look at what you've done to them, Fred. You've given them their son's life. You've turned their betrayal into an act of courage and incredible heroism. You've shown your daughter what a real man does under pressure. Emma has seen it too. Now Darren Sanders will spend the rest of his life feeling small and inadequate. He'll go to his grave knowing you're the better man. And Emma will know it too. Yep, Fred, you really got him good." Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.